The New Orleans Saints almost closed a deal with Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but come up just short. What happened? What options remain? What draft prospects fit the same prototype? And could Tom Brady be on his way out of the NFC South again? We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, final episode of the week here with your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making us your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And to kick off today's episode, is Tom Brady heading out of the NFC South again? Well, there have been some reports, a report, from 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh, the same gentleman that broke the news that Tom Brady would be signing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, reporting that, hey, maybe Tom Brady's going to be heading a little bit further south and taking his talents to South Beach, along with Tyreek Hill, along with Teddy Bridgewater, and along with Teron Armstead. Now, here's what I'll say. This would be an absolute pipe dream, right? This is an absolute pipe dream. It would be an absolute dream for any New Orleans Saints fan, because all of a sudden, it just rebalances the NFC South in terms of the quarterback turmoil that's been going on within the division. It's highly unlikely that Tom Brady actually gets traded or forces a trade to Miami. You saw Tom Brady come back out of retirement after 40 days of retirement, basically got bored and said, all right, okay, I'll go back. And then along with him came Chris Godwin and Leonard Fournette and all these other players, Shaq Mason. Like, they've returned almost their entire team based on the fact that Tom Brady is back in Tampa Bay. So it seems highly, highly, highly unlikely that Tom Brady is going to get moved to the Miami Dolphins or force his way to the Miami Dolphins. Remember, some of this also comes from previous reports. There was a report not too long ago that Miami, before Tom Brady retired and right after Sean Payton stepped away, was looking at trying to get an interview with Sean Payton and was also looking to bring Tom Brady to Miami. Then Tom Brady retired and Sean Payton said, no, I'm good. Or the Saints denied the request of Miami, which was likely either because the trade package wasn't good enough or because Sean Payton said, hey, no, I don't want to coach. I'm not really into coaching this year. Now, I think Sean Payton will be back as a coach, but he didn't want to do it in 2022. And so that's where that happened. Now, Miami ended up making a fantastic hire, and you've already started to see the spoils of it in Mike McDaniel, biracial king, guy I was really excited about and excited to see what he does with all these weapons. But now to kind of go to this place of, can they also trade for Tom Brady? Sure, they could, especially with all of that. But, you know, they've also sent out a bunch of trade picks for Tyreek Hill. They have their own trade capital. They have a bunch of stuff. And they have enough questions at quarterback, right? Are they going forward with Tua Tagovailoa? Are they going to move ahead with Teddy Bridgewater? What's going to happen there? Teddy kind of won't say that he's the backup. He won't say that he's the starter. There are reports that Mike McDaniel came in with the understanding that, yeah, we're good. I'm going to build around Tua Tagovailoa. So this would kind of fly in the face of that. But hey, look, if you got the opportunity to add the greatest of all time as your quarterback, you're going to do it, right? Or their perception of the greatest of all time. Like, you're going to do it. And that makes a ton of sense. But is this really going to happen? Is the NFC South going to reopen wide open yet again? I just don't see it happening. If it did, then all of a sudden the New Orleans Saints, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but arguably they become the best quarterback in the division. Because then otherwise you're going to Kyle Trask, or maybe you make a trade for Jimmy Garoppolo in that case with some of the assets that you get back for Tom Brady, kind of what Washington did, or excuse me, kind of what Indy did. So there's ways that you can kind of do all this and that you can see them still finding a way to get a quarterback there. But these quarterback options are so limited. You've got Baker Mayfield, you've got Jimmy Garoppolo, and then you have a couple of floating free agent quarterbacks, but that's it. I mean, like a Cam Newton, like that's not going to be the case. And so it's really strange, this idea of what if it does happen, right? What if it does happen? And then how does that impact the division? I think that if you can get Jimmy Garoppolo in Tampa, you're not going to get Jimmy Garoppolo and Bruce Arians don't really seem like a good pair for me. So I feel like that would be a big deal. But Bruce Arians and Baker Mayfield. I don't see that chemistry working either. And so I think they would really struggle to solve the quarterback spot. And the New Orleans Saints could leap because of that, but they also haven't been able to build up the wide receiver group yet, or the offensive group yet, over in free agency as of now. And so because of that, maybe it evens out a little bit. Like you have the quarterback answered for 2022 in New Orleans. You wouldn't in Tampa, but you have skill position players like crazy in Tampa. You don't have that in New Orleans. So it makes it a little bit tough, but it certainly makes the division a lot more achievable and a lot more attainable if Tom Brady's not under center at 45 years old, still playing like Tom Brady with one of your division foes, right? Not a division rival, but division foes in that case. So I don't know. It's interesting, right? Interesting kind of thing to consider. Could it happen? Could Tom Brady be out in Tampa Bay? Could he say, I came back, but I didn't really want to come back here. I want to come back and go over to Miami. I mean, I guess it could happen. I just don't see that being the case. But I mean, I think any Saints fan would welcome that happening. That is for sure. So you're not going to be able to really find anything in terms of odds on where Tom Brady is headed. But I'm going to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline here in just a little bit. But coming up next, I want to dive into what the New Orleans Saints haven't been able to do yet over on the offensive side of the ball, which is build those skill position players. They got close. We'll discuss why Marquez Valdes-Scantling didn't sign in New Orleans, what happened, and what free agent options remain, though there are few. Then we'll look at prototypes and get to the draft as well. But like I said, our friends over at betonline.ag have everything that you need. They're not going to be putting up odds on whether or not Tom Brady's going to get traded because it's that unlikely. But there's a bunch of other stuff you can get in on that's still around the NFL. If you're not interested in betting on football right now, you've got college basketball with, we're in the midst of Sweet 16, some big time upsets already over in the men's tournament, women's tournament getting started back up on Saturday. So much for you to get in on. Oh, and there's also pro basketball as well, of course, with the Lakers and the Pelicans coming up this weekend, which is huge. Go and check out Locked On Pelicans, by the way. So a whole bunch of great stuff over at BetOnline for you to find, and you can find that as well as all the sports news, analysis, and podcasts that you need so you can keep up with all of the trends and all the options as well. So go and check them out over at betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On NFL YouTube page. Everything you need to know from around the league from all the local experts in less than 30 minutes. Also, make sure you check the description for NOLA.com article in terms of how you can help with the relief efforts going on in New Orleans right now, wherever you are. So I want to dive now into where the New Orleans Saints came up a little bit short a couple days ago in trying to sign, or really yesterday, in trying to sign Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Well, they didn't really come up short, just that they got last-second competition. And we see this happening all the time around the league. It's not just New Orleans Saints. I mean, I think we see it with the New Orleans Saints a lot more, right? You and I notice it with the New Orleans Saints a lot more. But it happens with every team anytime that they're in free agency and stuff like that. But they got down the road on a contract for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, a guy I've been calling for since the very beginning of the offseason to serve as the second receiver opposite Michael Thomas in 2022. And unfortunately, at the last second, they were offering him a 2-year deal. They were the front runners to land him, all these good things. And then the tale as old as time. A team in the last second came in and offered him a different contract, and he took that contract. And that team was the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember, the Kansas City Chiefs last week traded Tyreek Hill to the Miami Dolphins, much like we hope that Tom Brady will be traded to the Miami Dolphins. I'm just kidding. But, once that happened, they had a huge hole in terms of a deep threat there. And that's what Marquez Valdes-Scantling does. That's the role that he serves. And again, if you needed credence toward that idea, look at what it is that Kansas City did. They traded away Tyreek Hill, and who did they call? They called Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So they ended up coming in with a 3-year deal. It's a lengthier contract. The money might have been better, all of that. So Valdes-Scantling ended up choosing Kansas City. And this kind of goes to the conversation that we had in yesterday's episode about whether or not the New Orleans Saints are a viable and desirable free agent destination. And I think that they are, and I don't think that this flies in the face of that. I think that this is just an example that sometimes contract term matters, right? It's not just about the money, even though I'm sure the money might have been better. It's basically a 3-year, $30 million deal that can get up to, I believe, $36 million. So that money might have been more than New Orleans was willing to offer at that time. But also, again, going from a 2-year deal to a 3-year deal, it extends the life of your contract a little bit, the likelihood that you have a job over the course of the next 2 years as opposed to just 1 year. You can kind of subtract a year from those short-term contracts. So now the New Orleans Saints weren't able to land Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and he is now a Kansas City Chief. Are there any free agent options that are available? And I think that there can be. We've talked about Will Fuller to death already. Is it time to start talking about Julio Jones? I don't know. Like, I feel weird about a guy that has dealt with injuries his entire career, that has been on a rival team his entire career, but you kind of have to erase that, right? The Falcons sure don't. They sign Saints players all the time. That has dealt with the hamstring injuries on and off, that's missed a ton of time, that, you know, the Tennessee Titans made this huge move to trade for, and then just a year later, now they're cutting him. He's 33 years old. He's one of the best combine performers we've ever seen. He's one of the best yardage getters that we've ever seen, but he doesn't always help to put points on the board. And I think that's something that the New Orleans Saints, especially after last year when they struggled to put points on the board, that and obviously that had a lot to do with injuries and, you know, all these other things, right? There's a lot of context and nuance to that statement. But I think that when you look at what it is that you want to be able to do, you want to be able to put points on the board. I don't know if Julio Jones helps you do that at this point in his career. So instead, are we going to start talking about a reunion with Emmanuel Sanders, maybe, who did perform well in New Orleans? I mean, you look at the last few years in terms of what the New Orleans Saints have had opposite Michael Thomas, and we've been talking about Tre'Quan Smith getting around 400 yards per season and everything. But then when you had Emmanuel Sanders, he brought you, just to make sure I get the number right here, 726 yards, right? He got the incentive for getting over 60 catches on the season, all of that, like 5 touchdowns. I think that there's something there, but how impactful is he going to be at 35 years old on the field for you? How healthy can he be? How much can, you know, how long can he stay on the field? All that. Now, we did get a good look at him last year in a situation that I thought was really interesting, which was the Buffalo Bills, right? You had Stephon Diggs, who is your bona fide wide receiver 1. You have Michael Thomas, who's your bona fide wide receiver 1. You had Josh Allen, who is your big arm quarterback that can get the ball downfield, all that. You have Jameis Winston, who's your big arm quarterback that can get the ball downfield and all that, both of which have a little bit of mobility. And he came away, Emmanuel Sanders did, with 42 catches on 72 targets, 626 yards, and 14.9 yards per catch and 4 touchdowns. That's not bad. That's not bad. Is it what you want? I mean, I don't know. But at this point, can you really be picky, right? Like, if you just want to get wide receiver talent in the building for the team, like, can you really be picky? I had somebody mention to me Albert Wilson the other day. Albert Wilson just he's not a field stretcher. He doesn't get downfield. He's averaged like 8 yards per catch over the last 2 seasons. So maybe not the best fit in terms of what it is that the Saints are clearly looking for when they go after a guy like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Keelan Cole is another name that I've seen a bunch. He's averaging 16, 15 yards per catch over the course of the past few seasons. Some of that has to do with the offense too, but he had, you know, a Tre'Quan Smith season last year, 28 catches, 449 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, does that really add anything to you if you're already talking about potentially bringing Tre'Quan Smith back, or are you just bringing in 2 Tre'Quan Smiths at that point? So I don't know. I mean, it gets more and more challenging in terms of where the free agent pool is, unless you're willing to roll the dice on a guy like Odell Beckham Jr. or a guy like Julio Jones or a guy like Jarvis Landry. That would kind of have to be where you go next if you're the New Orleans Saints and you want to try to find some additional free agent wide receiver talent. And until then, I think you just have to look towards draft, because you can't just say, oh, Michael Thomas is coming back, everything's good, everything's going to be fine. I don't think that that's the case. I think you still have to address it. So let's use Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who the Saints clearly pursued and were the front runners to land. And let's look at him, create a prototype around him, and see which draft wide receivers fit that mold. These big-bodied, can do a couple of different things, but mainly are deep threats, field stretchers for you. Let's dig into who those players are and all the different areas of the draft where they can be found. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasty protein bars on the market. The protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. Hope you're still holding strong in all your New Year's resolutions. Thanks to Built Bar, I am. I wanted to eat well. I wanted to get fit. And, well, I don't know about getting fit, but I'm eating well. And that is all a big part of Built Bar. Built Bar is a big part of that plan. Make sure that you go and check them out. And if you haven't tried the Built Puffs yet, I can't tell you how phenomenal they are. Cinnamon churro, banana cream pie, these fantastic flavors that are the world's first protein-infused marshmallow. That's what Built Bar does. They find a way to make it delicious, and then they make it healthy. So go and check them out. And you can also find great flavors as well, like mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, cookies and cream, all covered in 100% chocolate. While you're getting those 17 grams of protein and all that deliciousness, though, you're only getting about 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs. Go and check them out over at Built.com. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKED15 so you can get 15% off of your next order. That's 15% off with the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a deep dive into the NFL draft class of wide receivers. Going to circle back to our Cody Burns conversation at the beginning of next week. But after this Marquez Valdes-Scantling situation in which the Saints almost got him, but then he ended up signing with the Kansas City Chiefs, I thought it'd be fun to sort of use his prototype or use his measurables as a prototype for the draft and looking at what some of these draft receivers bring to the table and how they potentially match up to who and what he is. So we're talking about 6'4", 200 plus pounds, 4.37 speed. Those are basically the things that we're looking for there. So let's say 6'2" and above, 200 pounds and above, 4.4 speed or better, right? Somewhere in that 4.37 to 4.47 range, right? So the first one that, of course, always jumps to mind is Christian Watson out of North Dakota State University. We talked about him a little bit yesterday. Just to recap, he is also 6'4". He is also 200 plus pounds. He ran a 4.36 40 at the combine, 43 receptions, 800 yards, 7 touchdowns last season. He's somebody that can do things with the ball in his hand, in addition to being a deep threat and a guy that can stretch the field for you. And because of his size and his bulk, he's able to make some tough catches over the middle of the field, things like that. So he does a little bit of everything for you, but competition level is going to be a big question mark there. So Christian Watson is probably the most successful one in terms of who the Saints could target in the draft and bring in that has the same or at least similar enough measurables and skill set to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who they were interested in. Now, would the Saints pick Christian Watson at 18? It's possible. It gives you the fifth-year option on him. You could look to trade back into the first round to get him, maybe. There are a couple different things that you can do, but I look at maybe Christian Watson as somebody that could be had in the second round. Maybe you have to move up to get him, right? From 49, you got to get into the early 30s or whatever, early part of the round. But it's certainly something that they can do. The Saints are not afraid to trade up, and there is a reality in which they trade back. They stay in the first round, maybe trade back with, say, the Packers or something like that, and then take him at 22 or something, of that nature. But you have to make sure that the package is right so that you end up actually trading back for the first time since 2007. I mean, the Saints just don't do that very often because you need the value not only in terms of the compensation in terms of picks, but you need the value in terms of the players that are left on the board. So if you're going to move back 4 spots, you have to have 5 players at 18 that you're perfectly willing to take at 18, right? So that's sort of the way that I look at it. They could go that route of the trade back and then maybe make it a little bit more sensible to get a guy like Christian Watson, or try to trade back into the first round and get him. Something I'm going to book away from when we do our mock draft, our big mock draft later on this offseason. Okay, so we know Christian Watson is kind of like the perfect prototype. But now, like we mentioned, we were going to bend the rules a little bit and try to find some of these other guys that maybe do that. So this one, you don't necessarily have to bend the rules in terms of size, but you might have to bend the rules in terms of speed. And it's Drake London. Drake London, the 6'4", 219-pound wide receiver out of USC. He is somebody that really kind of does a lot of everything. He's got great ball skills, great, he's actually kind of elusive for his size. Like, he has some getaway in him. Good, very good route runner, extremely physical, which is part of the way that he's able to get away, right? He just carries a lot of weight and is able to kind of bowl through players. But what we don't know about him is his speed. And I've seen people talk about how he could have run in the 4.3s and then he could have run in the 4.4s, but then we heard that with Treylon Burks, and Treylon Burks did what? He ran a 4.55. We heard that with David Bell. David Bell ran like a 4.68. So, I mean, it's hard to try to project what the speed is, but if you look at it on tape, the speed's not really there for me on tape, but everything else is, right? Like, he's a really good route runner. He does a great job on comebacks and does a great job on hitches and getting available underneath. Doesn't really push the ball too far downfield, but you can with him because of his size. My issue is that he is mostly productive on the left side of the field, or on the weak side of the field, which is Michael Thomas's role. He is an X receiver. And so can you shoehorn him into a new role, or do you shoehorn him into being a big slot? And then you still have to answer the deep threat question over on the other side. He's got a basketball background, which is nice. We know the New Orleans Saints love multi-sport athletes. But does he really fit or fill the need that you have? And does it matter? Does it matter? Like, can you even be that picky at this point? If you've only got Michael Thomas, is there anything wrong with having somebody else who has effectively Michael Thomas's skill set? Maybe not as refined as Michael Thomas, but that can impact the game in a similar way by being a big-bodied guy that can win underneath and every now and then can push downfield because he can win those one-on-one balls. So it just depends on really what your style of receiver is. Many of you who are here with me on the draft class last year know I am not a huge fan of like the big guy receiver that just does big things. I had trouble with T. Higgins because of that, and I was dead wrong about T. Higgins. Dead wrong about T. Higgins, looking at him and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and everybody, Tyler Boyd, all in Cincinnati. So I am by no means infallible. The other thing is, where is Drake London going to go? I've seen the guy be drafted in mocks in the top 5, but then I've also seen him in round 4. His stock is so volatile, and we just don't have the answers to the questions that we need so far. I believe he's holding his own pro day at the beginning of April, in which we'll get a better understanding of where he runs. But if he runs and actually comes in the 4.4 range, leave alone 4.3. If he comes in the 4.4 range, the guy's a first rounder. Like, there's no doubt about it. So we'll see what he's able to bring in there. Another one, a guy that we've talked about a little bit, going 6'2" this time, 201 pounds. So he checks the box for over 200 pounds. And it's Romeo Doubs, right? The wide receiver out of Nevada. I won't spend too much time on him. He needs some help with his hands a little bit. We need to see exactly what his speed is. He is a deep threat kind of guy. He's a rangy wide receiver, but he wasn't able to run at the combine, or didn't run at the combine. Then he got hurt after the combine, and so he didn't run at his pro day either. So we just don't know what he's able to do but we know that he's fast, right? He's a big time deep threat in 2020. That's what he did and everything, but we just don't have any measurables for it. So that's something that's a big question that he'll have to answer over the offseason. All right, one last guy that we'll take a deeper dive into is Texas Tech junior wide receiver, 6'3", 218-ish pounds, Eric Ezukanma. He didn't run his 40 at the combine, but hopefully we'll get some measurable for that from a pro day or some other workout at some point. But I mean, he's the same thing, right? He is kind of like Romeo Doubs in that way, to where he's a big-bodied wide receiver that's also able to win downfield, that's able to stretch the field, all those things, right? He checks all the boxes, basically. And there are a few. There are a few guys that absolutely do that. I mean, you look at some of these other names that I also have on this list here. Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati, which the New Orleans Saints wide receiver, either Cody Burns or the new offensive assistant that they brought in that's also working with wide receivers. One of them was at Cincinnati. The other was at North Dakota State University. And so they're getting a look at these guys. That's Christian Watson at North Dakota State University, and that's Alec Pierce at Cincinnati. So they're getting a look at both of them, which I think is smart. You can also look at guys like, okay, here's one that like checks the boxes, but that I'm nervous about. Justin Ross, the Clemson wide receiver, broke out as a true freshman and then has not been able to meet that, has declined ever since. And yes, he didn't have, Trevor Lawrence last season, and there were some big time inaccuracies with DJ Uiagalelei and all these other things, but I get concerned about that. Like, you don't see that very often, but what you see every time that happens is a lack of success in the NFL. So I'm not really buying into Justin Ross as of right now. I hope he proves me wrong though. And then, a couple of other names in here. Samari Torrey out of Nebraska. We've talked about him before. You can go a little bit deeper and go to Dijon Dixon out of Nichols, which could be a guy. But the other one that I would really keep an eye out on would be George's George Pickens. And I wrote about him over at Saints Wire not too long ago. 6'3", over 200 pounds, 4.47, 4.49, if I remember correctly. He ran in the low or the high 4.4 range. And I think that he would be somebody else to keep an eye out on that would be able to check all of those boxes. There are other deep threats around, obviously, guys like Treylon Burks, guys like Jamison Williams, guys like John Mechie, but they don't necessarily check all the rest of these metrics in that Marquez Valdes-Scantling role. But the good news, Jalen Tolbert out of South Alabama is another one as well. The good news is that the Saints swung and they worked to get this contract done with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Unfortunately, Kansas City came in at the last second. If they're not able to get that role filled in free agency, they can still try to fill the slot role with guys like Jarvis Landry and Adam Humphries and so on and so forth. But if they want this perennial deep threat, this guy that can impact from that part of the field, there's a lot of options that fit the Marquez Valdes-Scantling role in the NFL draft this offseason. So we'll continue to keep you up to date with everything going on around the New Orleans Saints, getting closer and closer to free agency. We'll talk about some more tackle options for the New Orleans Saints, and then we'll get into Cody Burns and what he might be able to do with Michael Thomas based upon the development that we have seen from other wide receivers in his coaching career. So we'll get to that on Monday, as well as everything else you need to know around your New Orleans Saints. As always, I thank you so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Make sure you go and check out that Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Ryan Tracy, Eric Crocker, all NFL Draft every Monday through Friday, everything that you need. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day. Thank you so much for building me into your routine. For more on your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.